blacks really benefited more the first 100 years after slavery than we have in the last 50 years. I was born in 1937 during the Depression. Everyone in my small, low-income black community, 98% of the households had a man and a woman raising children. Elderly people could walk safely in that community without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. Never heard a gunfire during that time. Never heard of a child being shot to death in the crib. But there are 50 children today who have been shot and killed in our cities.
All right, guys, so I stumbled across another great episode of Dr. Phil. Boy, I gotta tell you, Dr. Phil's show is pretty based, okay? I don't know what his political beliefs are, and I really don't care. But what I do appreciate about his show is the fact that he is providing an actual mainstream platform where conservative and liberal opinions can come together and have a real conversation / debate without it being overwhelmingly in favor of the liberal narrative, the liberal agenda, like The View. Okay, one of my main criticisms of The View is that they market themselves as having women from all sides of the political aisle when quite clearly they don't. Even the conservative women on the show, like Anna Navarro and Alyssa Farrah Griffin, are clearly Democrat Party propagandists. Okay, they're clearly liberals, right? I mean, it's very clear. Okay, and that show is not balanced. It's not balanced. Dr. Phil, though, he got it right. Okay, in terms of what he's been doing on his show, talking about very important conversations, cultural conversations, having both sides of the aisle come on the show and to talk about it. I love it, honestly. I really do. And this conversation right here about reparations is another conversation that I love because it's going to feature this guy by the name of Mr. Bob Woodson, who is going to push back against this push for reparations that we're seeing out in California, where they have Looney Tunes proposals like giving black folks $5 million a piece, okay, and wiping away all their debt, paying for free college, them not paying taxes. I mean, just giving black folks the world, even though technically, slavery was illegal in California, but they had some slavery, so therefore they feel like they're owed something, right? And this guy is going to make an excellent argument, basically the same arguments that I make in regards to why I don't think that reparations is the right thing to do. Now, a little bit about his background before I get into it. This guy is a civil rights activist, and I'm not talking about a race hustler civil rights activist. No. He actually has worked as a social worker in the communities, particularly to try to prevent violence. His biggest thing is the violence that goes on in black communities. He's also been pushing back against the propaganda coming from the left, particularly when it comes to trying to reinvent history. Okay, the 1619 Project, he launched a counter project called the 1776 Unite Project that is a counter to that. Again, this guy's based, okay, for the most part. This is what we should have more of in regards to so-called civil rights activists. And his argument against reparations, I think, is pretty spot on. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
You say you don't support reparations. Why not?
Not everybody suffered equally. I mean, when you go into slavery, it's much more complex than white people were the oppressors and black people were the victims. If you dissect it, you will find there were about 3,700 free blacks who owned 12,000 slaves.
Facts. Facts. And my question always is, are those descendants of those black slave owners, are they going to have to empty out their bank account, right, to give to other black folks, okay, who they enslaved, the descendants of those slaves? If you don't want that, right, if you don't have black folks whose families own slave, right, if they're not paying reparations, you're not actually asking for reparations. Because under a lot of these proposals that the woke revolutionaries are putting out here about reparations, what they're doing is that they're just giving anybody who's black a check. And you're going to end up giving black people whose families own slaves, right, who've been wealthy for generations because of the fact that their families own slaves or whatever, you're going to be giving them a check. That's not reparations, okay? That is a handout. The definition of reparations is when you have somebody who did a wrong righting that wrong that they did. Okay, you're not righting any wrongs with a blank check to people just because of their skin color, right? Again, that's one of my biggest criticisms of the reparations proposal, is that I haven't seen one that's actually realistic, that actually is reparations. Most of the proposals I've seen are actually just handouts, right? They're just, well, if you're black, or if that you can, prove that you had ancestors that's been here for a certain amount of time, then, you get a check or whatever, right? The actual status of those ancestors, were those ancestors actually slaves, were they slave owners, doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. They don't really care about that. They just, a lot of these people, they just want to check. Again, real reparations would be finding people who own slaves, okay, and having them, right, write a check to the people that were enslaved. But again, that there is no proposal like that. The logistics and the practicality of it is just, it's impossible, considering that it's 150, 175 plus years removed. Okay, we're beyond that. We're beyond it. Again, these proposals are just silly at this point.
Black slaves. The question is, do the descendants of those free blacks who owned black slaves, do they pay? Blacks really benefited more the first 100 years after slavery we have in the last 50 years. I was born in 1937 during the Depression. Everyone in my small, low-income black community, 98% of the households had a man and a woman raising children.
Facts.
Elderly people could walk safely in that community without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren.
Facts.
Never heard a gunfire during that time. Never heard of a child being shot to death in the crib.
Facts.
But there are 50 children today who have been shot and killed in our cities. If you're talking about remedies, we've got to look beyond saying that every solution has to have a winner and a loser, that blacks can only benefit if whites lose. We have to be defined more than just victims of oppression. When whites were at their worst, blacks were at their best. When we were denied access to hotels, we built our own. We have to communicate to our people the history of how they achieved in the face of oppression. But if we continue to sit back and say all of the challenges that we face in out-of-wedlock births of violence, that somehow the control of that is in the hands of white America, and therefore until white people change, there's nothing that we can do. This sets up a terrible situation for this nation.
Well, I mean, again, what it does is that it relieves responsibility from those who are actually the real problem, which is the criminals, the single baby mamas, the deadbeat fathers, okay, the culture that is prevalent in a lot of these inner liberal cities among black folks. If you just blame the white man for the problem and say, well, it's all the white man's fault, then, you never have to do anything. You never have to take any real personal responsibility. But the reality is, based off history and what this guy is saying, which is true, is that you can argue that during the worst times when you actually have real white racists running around, KKK running around, actually really lynching folks, black people were doing all right. Now, in the grand scheme of things, things were bad, okay? I mean, it wasn't great, but culturally speaking, in regards to how black people treated each other, in regards to crime, families, community, it's much better. It was a lot better. Guys, we know this, right? Liberals will deny these facts, but this is true. One of the main predictors of crime and poverty is single motherhood rates, right? Black folks, back in the 1950s, just 9% of black children lived without a father. From 1890 to 1950, black women had a higher marriage rate than white women. In 1964, you had 24.5% of births, black births, were out of wedlock. Now, fast forward to 1994, you have 70.7% of black births being out of wedlock. You have 44% of black children have a father in the home today. the poverty rate for single mothers, black mothers, is over 30%. The poverty rate for married black families is under 10%. Also on top of that, the crime rates in the 1940s/1950s were much lower than they are today. So tell me what happened. What happened to all that? Well, what happened was that you had programs like Lyndon B. Johnson's The Great Society that the government started to implement to basically disincentivize strong nuclear families, to disincentivize women getting married. Instead, they would get married to the government, having kids out of wedlock, the sexual revolution, the breakdown of the family. And then lo and behold, what happens? You have crime increasing, violence increasing, because again, the breakdown of the family structure. It's really that simple. And people think that, well, reparations is going to fix that. Handing people a check is not going to fix the underlying cultural issues that are plaguing the black community. Government handouts, Democrat policies have been much more detrimental to black folks than so-called systemic racism. I'm so serious. And so when people ask, well, what are you black conservatives trying to conserve? Because back in the day, the white man was so evil and blacks were doing so bad. I'm like, no. Blacks from a cultural and family unit perspective. Yes, we were discriminated against, but we were not doing bad, right? Was it great? No, it was not great. Wasn't even good, right? But in regards to culture, in regards to family structure, violence, just general sense of community and togetherness, much better. And if you had black folks who had the same mentality had back then, if they were living today, who knows where black folks would be? Who knows? We'd be like the Asians, statistically, right? I'm just saying. So when people ask, what are you black conservatives trying to conserve? Well, I just told you. I'm telling you. Traditional values, conservative values, is the key. That's what we need. We don't need a handout and a check. Black folks have never needed that. But again, the liberals want you to think, well, that's what you need. You need a check. You need more money. Well, what about all the millions, billions, if not trillions of dollars that have been poured into the black community from the government ever since the 1960s? And look where we're at. You still asking for more money. You keep telling us that money's going to solve the problem? Again, it's ridiculous. It's nonsense.
The big crisis facing America is not racial. It is a moral and spiritual freefall that is consuming our children.
Facts. A moral and spiritual freefall that is consuming our children. Because their parents, who a lot of them happen to be born after, the 1960s, integration, the Great Society, all these things. They had a moral and spiritual freefall as well. They went through all of that stuff. Again, this stuff is not that hard to figure out, bro. Right? It's really not.
The highest death rate among black families is homicide. Among Silicon Valley, the highest level of suicide, 6 times the national average. In Appalachia, they're prescription drugs. And so if we are to address this crisis that is causing our children to lack a sense of personal responsibility or value for their own life, they will take their own life or take someone else's. So in order to address that, we must come together and look beyond race and realize America is drowning because it's in a moral and spiritual freefall.
Facts. And it's not just something that's a black community thing, right? I know, in a lot of my videos, it seems like, oh, I'm just talking about black folks. Well, I mean, look, I'm black, right? And at the end of the day, I care, and a lot of these issues are not just specific to black folks. They're specific to this country in general. Okay. But I'm just saying, I deal with this a lot because, as a black person, I want to see black people do better because I know that black people can be better. We have been better. And this is why I'm always having these types of conversations. And I need people to understand that it doesn't come out of a place of hate. It comes out of a place of actually love and knowing that, okay, black people actually have a history of overcoming, not a history of victimhood. And this pushing of victimhood on black folks, it really, really, really makes me upset. It really does. Because that's not who we are historically. We're not victims, right? We've overcome the worst of the worst. And if we had that same mentality, again, I think that black folks would be a lot better off. I really do.
We should be defined by the worst of what we were in the past, but we should be defined by what we want to become in the future. And that people are motivated to change when you give them a vision of victories that are possible, not constantly reminding them of injuries to be avoided.
I think it's not either or, I think it's and. I think we can do both. We cannot ignore the reality of systemic racism and how it's affected the black community. You can't just be like, we need to just focus on our own issues. The violence is happening in the black community, it's the black people's fault, and we need to focus on that. Actually, it's a lot of things. So we can't just separate them and be like, just focus on yourselves, don't worry about racism. It's finding us. It finds us wherever we go. It's not our fault, right? So
it's not our fault, right? It's not our fault. Racism finds us wherever we go. Again, it's amazing because you have these immigrant groups that come over to this country, okay? They're not white, and they're very successful despite the so-called systemic racism. Again, I'm still trying to figure out how that works. The woke still do not have an answer for how in the world do you have African immigrants who are black, right? Their skin color is black, who come over here and they do well despite the systemic racism. They're able to accomplish whatever they want to accomplish, again, despite the racism. Is it because they have certain values, right? Is it because of certain cultural practices that just lead itself to success? The same thing that they're telling black folks that, hey, you know, this is white supremacy, right? Like, for example, again, nuclear families are white supremacy. The Protestant work ethic is white supremacy. Being rational, on time, right? You know, things, basic things and traits that you need to have to be successful is white supremacy. Maybe it's because they adhere to some of those things that they're successful. And, you know, they're not basically embracing the behaviors that make people not successful. Maybe that's it. Again, this mentality of, oh, it's not us, it's them, it's the white man's fault, is one of the biggest things holding black folks back. It really is.
So what you're saying is we need to focus our issues on ourselves and not wait for this. No, we can do both. We can get reparations and we can work on issues within our community as we have always been doing. But we need to start removing the barriers that are there that shouldn't be there.
Do you have a story?
Yeah, again, a lot of these people like this woman, they make a career out of selling people a pipe dream that they're going to get a check from the government for being black, right? And I'm here to tell you that that's not going to happen and that you should work hard, embrace traditional and American values, okay, that have been proven time and time again to make people successful regardless of your skin color or your race. I'm giving you real practical advice that's actually going to lead to you getting your own reparations or getting the money that you want. And you got other people, again, selling you victimhood, telling you that, hey, you know, wait for the government and they give you a handout. And again, these people are making money doing that. And they're never questioned about what are your motivations and intention for selling people a pipe dream. Instead of being real with people and letting people know that, hey, if you put your mind to it, if you work hard, if you embrace traditional conservative American values, hey, you can get out of poverty. You can achieve whatever you want in this country, regardless of your skin color. Again, I don't understand how a message of empowerment is rejected from the black community. When black conservatives come out here and say this stuff, that's rejected. But a message of victimhood, woe is me, is the white man's fault, let's wait for a check that you're never going to get, that's embraced. That's gospel, right? It's just amazing how that works. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a black conservative perspective. Peace.